I don't need crumbs from a wrinkled, old woman. And before anyone could stop him, Daniel, suited, polished, and proud, spat in his own mother's face, in front of his staff, in front of his driver, not knowing what she had come to give him. But now, the son would walk away with nothing. And the driver? He would drive into a future he never saw coming. Before we unfold this powerful tale about pride, humility, and the price of forgetting where you came from, tap like, share, and subscribe if you believe a mother's blessing is worth more than any bank account. Now let's begin. Daniel used to share a room with four cousins and a leaking zinc roof. He once lined up barefoot at public taps and split a loaf of bread into 4 pieces for dinner. But now Daniel wore suits stitched in Italy. Now he drove a German machine with tinted glass. Now he shook hands with men who wore watches worth more than his childhood home. It all changed after one deal, a lucrative real estate contract that landed Daniel a 7-figure commission. It wasn't billionaire money, but for someone who once counted coins to buy Gary, it felt like he had made it. And he let everyone know. On Instagram, he posted daily quotes about the grind. On WhatsApp, his status read, "No more poverty in this bloodline." In person, he became harder to reach and harder to recognize. He walked with a chest full of ego and a head too high to hear those beneath it. When his childhood friend Chuka called to congratulate him, Daniel replied, "I don't pick calls from people still stuck in survival mode." He no longer visited his old neighborhood. Too dusty, he said. Too many familiar faces with outdated dreams. Even his language changed. He didn't say please anymore. He said do it. He didn't say thank you. He said that's expected. One morning, standing in front of a mirror in his new penthouse, Daniel adjusted his cufflinks and smirked at his reflection. "They didn't see this coming," he whispered. "Even my mother. She'll have to book an appointment to speak to me now." In his eyes, money didn't just change his life. It changed his worth. And anyone who reminded him of where he came from was no longer welcome in the world he believed he had built alone. What Daniel didn't know was that his past was about to knock on his glass door, not to congratulate him, but to test what kind of man his money had created. The day Daniel walked into the luxury showroom, he didn't blink at the price tag. $95 million, he asked, raising a brow at the sales rep. "Add the premium sound system. And change the color. I want something that doesn't blend in with poverty." 3 hours later, he was behind the tinted glass of a brand-new, jet-black SUV. Its engine purred like power itself. And beside him stood Michael, mid-30s, quiet, respectful, and newly employed as Daniel's personal driver. Michael had a calm energy, the kind that observed more than it spoke. On his first day, he opened the door for Daniel with both hands, bowing slightly. Daniel didn't even look at him. He was too busy adjusting his designer sunglasses. They cruised past Daniel's old neighborhood, and Michael, curious, asked gently, "Sir, that place we passed, was that your former area?" Daniel scoffed. That's where dreams go to die? Full of people with mud in their brains. I don't even roll down my windows there." He started laughing to himself, scrolling through his phone. One of them even had the nerve to message me on Facebook. "Remember me?" He shook his head. "If I remembered you, you'd be in a better place." People should stop embarrassing themselves. At social events, Daniel barely greeted people without titles. He introduced himself as real estate mogul, emerging billionaire. Deal closer. The old Daniel, who once waited for his mother to bring food from the market, buried, replaced by a man who now posted tweets like, "If your parents are poor, make sure your kids don't know it." And Michael, he saw it all. The arrogance, the rants, the disdain for anyone who reminded Daniel of who he once was. One afternoon, while driving Daniel to a private golf event, Michael asked quietly, "Sir, do you still see your mother?" Daniel laughed sharply. "That woman? Please. She's proud I made it. That's enough. I don't have time for village emotions." Michael glanced at him through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The roads ahead were smooth. But what Daniel couldn't see was that life was already preparing a bend sharp enough to humble him. The restaurant glowed with low amber lights and soft jazz music. Waiters in tuxedos glided between tables as wine glasses clinked and laughter filled the air. At the center of one round table, Daniel sat flanked by executives and investors, his gold wristwatch gleaming like a trophy. He leaned back confidently, swirling a glass of red wine in his hand. "You know," he said, voice loud enough to carry across nearby tables. When I was growing up, I used to think humility was a virtue. But now I realize it's just a poor man's excuse for not winning. A few chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. One man, Mr. Bayo, smiled politely. We all come from humble beginnings, Daniel. Let's not forget the ladder we climbed. Daniel smirked. Some ladders deserve to be kicked down once you're up. Why hold on to rusted roots? He sipped his wine. My own mother used to beg neighbors for food just so I could go to school. Sad, really. I mean, what kind of life is that? Living off pity. There was a silence. Then Daniel added with a chuckle. Now look at me. Multi-million naira deals, 3 properties in Lekki, and a driver who opens my door. While some people are still waiting for rice donations during Christmas. The laughter this time was awkward. Those old folks, he continued, still lining up for handouts like beggars. As if the world owes them comfort because they managed to live long. Michael, standing by the corner in his driver's uniform, heard every word. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Daniel raised his glass. Here's to the new era, where respect is earned, not inherited through wrinkles or poverty. Glasses clinked, but the cheer was hollow. No one noticed that one of the waiters, older, gray-haired, and stooped, paused briefly behind Daniel, his face unreadable. In that moment, Daniel had no idea that words spoken in jest would echo back his judgment, and that very soon, he would be reminded that the poor he mocked might just be the roots he'll wish he never abandoned. Mama Grace sat by the window of her tiny bungalow, her eyes tracing the dusty road that led away from the village. The letter Daniel had sent 3 years ago, before his phone went silent, lay on her lap, its corners worn and soft from the many times she had unfolded it just to feel close to him. The neighbors had been talking. They'd seen him on TV, heard his name on the radio. Your son is a big man now, Mama Grace, they'd say, clapping her on the back. He's made it. And so, that morning, she rose before dawn. She tied her faded but best wrapper tightly around her waist, straightened her back with dignity, and opened the little wooden box under her bed. Inside was a brown envelope wrapped in a piece of white cloth. Inside that envelope, deeds to a piece of ancestral land now in high demand, plus a certificate to a hidden family account she'd nurtured over the years. It wasn't just money. It was legacy. I kept it all for when he's ready, she whispered to herself. And now that he's become a man, he'll know what to do. She used her walking stick to steady herself as she climbed aboard the rickety village bus, clutching the envelope to her chest. The ride was long, bumpy, and hot. At one point, her seatmate offered her a cold sachet of water. She smiled and declined. Her hands were too busy holding on to tomorrow. By the time she arrived in the city, night was creeping in. The buildings stood tall and shiny, intimidating in their grandeur. But Mama Grace wasn't afraid. Her son lived among these giants. She asked for directions with soft humility, and after some confusion and a lot of walking, she finally arrived at a sleek glass building. Excuse me, she said to the security guard, her voice gentle. My name is Grace. I'm here to see my son, Daniel. The guard blinked. The Daniel? Yes, she nodded, holding up the envelope with both hands. Tell him his mother is here. As she stood by the gates of success, worn but hopeful, Mama Grace had no idea that the very gift she carried, a symbol of love and trust, might never make it into his hands, not because she was too late, but because he had become too blind. The sun was already high by the time Mama Grace arrived at Daniel's office the next morning. Dressed in the same wrapper she wore for her husband's burial, she stood at the security gate, squinting at the tinted glass building that seemed to scrape the sky. Her feet ached from yesterday's journey, but her heart beat with expectation. She found a small concrete slab near the fence and sat down, the brown envelope still clutched tightly in her hand. Occasionally, she'd adjust her headscarf, brush the dust off her wrapper, and whisper to herself, he will come. My son will come. Workers walked past her, men in suits, women in high heels. Some glanced at her, others ignored her completely. The guards exchanged puzzled looks, but she told them gently, please, just tell him Mama Grace is here. He'll know. Hours passed. The sun shifted overhead, burning brighter, fiercer. Her wrapper clung to her back with sweat, and her stomach growled quietly. But she stayed. Every black SUV that pulled up made her sit up straighter. Every figure in a navy blue suit made her heart leap. But none of them were Daniel. At some point, one of the younger guards walked over with a bottle of water. "Mama, you sure you don't want to come sit in the shade?" She shook her head with a warm, motherly smile. "No, thank you, my son. My Daniel will come. I want him to see me." The young man hesitated, then walked away. By noon, the clouds had begun to roll in. A soft wind picked up, rustling the trees lining the compound. Still she sat. Inside the building, Daniel was in a meeting. He had seen the note passed to him earlier, something about a woman outside saying she's your mother. He scoffed. "What nonsense," he muttered, crumpling the paper and tossing it aside. "She should know better than to show up here. What does she want now?" Outside, Mama Grace's legs trembled slightly as she shifted her weight. A light drizzle had started to fall, and still, she would not move. "I raised him better than this," she murmured to herself, wiping her eyes quickly, though it was unclear whether it was the rain or her tears. By the time Daniel finally emerged, hours later, laughing with two investors, she was still there. Older, wetter, smaller somehow. She stood up with joy. "Daniel," she called, her voice bright with hope. He turned and frowned. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Daniel stepped out of the building, his polished shoes clicking confidently against the marble steps. He was flanked by two foreign investors, both laughing at a joke he'd just told about how everyone wants a piece once the money starts flowing. As he walked toward his parked SUV, his smile abruptly faded. There she was, soaked from head to toe, her wrapper clinging to her frail body, the brown envelope still pressed tightly against her chest. Her eyes lit up the moment their gazes met, a flicker of pure maternal joy, unshaken by the cold or the hours she had waited. "Daniel, my son," she said, stepping forward. "I heard of your blessings. I came." He didn't let her finish. "What are you doing here?" he barked, stopping a few feet away. "Are you trying to embarrass me in front of my clients?" The investors paused awkwardly, glancing between them. Mama Grace blinked, confused by his tone. "I brought something for you," she said softly, holding up the damp envelope. "I wanted to bless you now that." "Bless me?" Daniel scoffed. "With what? Rappers and bush advice?" Her hands trembled. "It's more than that. Just let me." "Enough," he snapped, stepping back as if she smelled of poverty. "Why would you even show up here uninvited? Go back to the dust you came from, old woman. This is not your world." The words landed like stones. Mama Grace took a step back, stunned. Her lips quivered. The guards, once sympathetic, now turned their eyes away, uncomfortable. Daniel's driver, Michael, was already by the car, frozen in disbelief at what he was witnessing. His jaw tightened. "I waited," Mama Grace said in a whisper. "All day, I waited to see you. I wore my best. I brought you the gift your father left." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Whatever that is, keep it. I don't need crumbs from anyone. Especially not from someone who still lives where goats walk the streets." She looked at him long and hard, and in that silence, something inside her seemed to break, but not out of anger, out of realization. The son she had raised, the one she used to carry on her back while hawking oranges, was gone. "I see," she murmured, folding the envelope slowly, her fingers trembling. She didn't cry. Instead, she turned and began to walk away. But not before Michael, still gripping the steering wheel, threw the car door shut and ran toward her. "Ma, please wait." Daniel looked back, confused. "What are you doing?" Michael didn't answer. He just took off his jacket and gently draped it over Mama Grace's shoulders, and what happened next would change both their lives forever. The next morning, the sun rose gently over the city, painting golden streaks across the skyline. Inside a modest guest waiting area beside Daniel's office compound, Mama Grace sat again, this time on a wooden bench Michael had helped her settle on after she refused to go back home. Her eyes were tired but resolute. The envelope, though damp from the day before, remained in her hands, still unsealed. "I raised that boy to have a good heart," she whispered to no one in particular. "Maybe I didn't teach him enough about what truly matters." Michael had offered to take her home, but she shook her head. "Let me just speak to him once more. Just once. Maybe his heart was just surprised yesterday." Michael nodded silently and went to wait by the car again, watching from a distance. Moments later, Daniel strutted out of the building, phone pressed to his ear, speaking loudly in his usual pompous tone. He laughed at whatever was said on the line, then paused when he saw her. Again, he muttered. He ended the call with a swipe and walked over, annoyance dancing in his every movement. You're still here, he snapped. I thought I made myself clear yesterday. Mama Grace slowly stood up, gripping the envelope tighter. Daniel, please, just hear me out. I didn't come to beg. I came to bless. He raised an eyebrow. Bless me? With what exactly? That dirty envelope. She ignored the sarcasm. This land, your father left it in my care. For years, I waited until you grew into a man who could handle what comes with real wealth. I thought yesterday meant you were ready. I thought I could finally hand this over. Daniel scoffed, glancing around to see who was watching. What? Some dusty land in the village? You think I care about that? It's not just land, she said gently. It's an entire estate now. Developers came last year. It's worth millions. I came to give it to you, not just because you're my son, but because I believed your hands could now hold something greater than money. Legacy. She held out the envelope, her fingers trembling. This was meant to bless you. Daniel stared at it, eyes narrowing. You want to buy your way into my life now? After all these years? Woman, you think I'm still that hungry village boy who needed coins for bread? Her smile faded. I thought you'd be proud. I walked from the bus park. I waited hours. I wore my best. And I didn't ask you to, Daniel said coldly. You made a scene. I should call security again. Honestly, you're embarrassing me. He snatched the envelope from her hands and held it up like trash. You think this matters to me now? He laughed bitterly. I'm swimming in millions. I own cars, apartments in Lekki, deals abroad. Mama Grace looked at him, really looked, and for a long moment, said nothing. Then softly, she replied, I didn't raise you to speak like this. And deep down you know it. He tossed the envelope at her feet, where it landed with a soft thud. I don't want your blessing. You came too late. Now, get out of my sight before I forget you're even my mother. The envelope still lay at her feet, gathering dust as the courtyard quieted around them. Mama Grace slowly bent to pick it up, brushing off the gravel with her worn fingers. Daniel rolled his eyes and made a show of glancing at his expensive wristwatch. Still here, he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. She straightened slowly. Her voice was quiet, almost pleading. Daniel, I came to bless you. I wanted you to have this land because I thought your success had made you wiser. I wanted to believe that the little boy who cried in my arms when his father died still lived somewhere in you. A few of Daniel's business partners were stepping out of the building now. His assistant stood frozen by the door, watching the exchange. Michael remained by the car, fists clenched, eyes on them. Daniel noticed the eyes on him and turned back to his mother, disgust rising in his throat. You really don't get it, do you? He hissed. You're standing in front of my office looking like a village beggar. You think you're helping me? You're making me look weak. She opened her mouth to respond, but he stepped closer. You think this gift matters? He said, waving his hand toward the envelope like it was a diseased rag. I've already made it. I've moved past people like you. You're from the dust. Stay in the dust. Then, it happened. He spat, right on her face. The sound silenced everything. A wet, cruel splatter, followed by a collective gasp. Mama Grace didn't flinch. The spittle dripped down the side of her cheek. She stood still, eyes wide, not with anger, not with pain, but with a kind of disbelief no mother should ever know. Daniel didn't stop there. You are a disgrace, he shouted, his voice echoing across the compound. Coming here in your old wrapper, embarrassing me in front of my staff, like I'm some village farmer. I don't need crumbs from an old woman. Take your filthy inheritance and go rot with it. The assistant turned away, horrified. One of the junior staff looked like she was on the verge of tears. Michael began walking toward them. Mama Grace slowly wiped her face with the edge of her wrapper. Her hands shook, but her eyes held something stronger than pain now, resolve. She looked at her son one last time. I carried you in this same wrapper when you were sick and hungry, she whispered. I didn't know this is who I was raising. Daniel scoffed and turned his back. But Michael stepped forward. Enough, he said, voice trembling with fury. Sir, with all due respect, that's your mother. That woman worked her bones to raise you, and you spit on her like trash. Daniel turned, incredulous. Michael, stay out of this. I won't, the driver said firmly. Because some things are bigger than money. And you just proved you're smaller than both. A stunned silence fell. Then Michael looked at Mama Grace, gently took her arm, and said, Ma, please come with me. You don't deserve this. Mama Grace looked back at her son one last time. He didn't. He just turned, muttering, "Ungrateful people everywhere," and walked away. The compound was still echoing with Daniel's cruel words when Michael, the driver, turned to face him fully. His hands trembled slightly, not out of fear, but out of a storm he could no longer hold back. "You know, sir," Michael began, voice calm but tight with emotion, "when I first took this job, I told my wife I was lucky to be driving a man who made it from nothing. Someone who could inspire me." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Spare me the sermon, Michael. You're a driver, not a philosopher." But Michael didn't flinch. He stepped forward. "And you're a poor man wearing wealth like borrowed clothes." The words cut sharper than any insult Daniel had ever received. He froze, unsure if he heard correctly. Murmurs rippled among the staff and onlookers nearby. Michael continued, "You think money made you better than the rest of us? It didn't. It just revealed who you really are. And it's not a man. It's a boy, scared that someone might remind him where he came from." Daniel's fists clenched. "Watch your mouth." "No," Michael snapped. "You watch your mother walk across town to bless you, and you spit in her face. In public. That's not power. That's poverty of the soul. That's a man drowning in ego, thinking he's swimming in success." Daniel glanced nervously at the onlookers, trying to laugh it off. "Michael, this is none of your business. Go back to the car." "I won't," Michael said. "Not now? Not ever. I can't work for someone who treats his own blood like garbage." He pulled the car key from his pocket and placed it gently on the hood of the luxury SUV. Then he took off the branded driver's jacket Daniel had given him and folded it with slow, deliberate care. "You once told me, loyalty is everything. But I just watched you betray the one woman who made you who you are." Mama Grace, still wiping her face, looked up, her eyes locking with Michael's. There was warmth there, gratitude. Even in her shaken state, she nodded softly at the man who had spoken what she couldn't. Michael turned to her. "Ma, come with me. My apartment is small, but my heart is big. I can't offer much, but I can offer respect. And you deserve that, at the very least." Without waiting for Daniel's response, he gently guided Mama Grace toward the gate. As they walked away, people parted for them, silently honoring their exit. Daniel stood rooted in place. For the first time, something inside him wavered. But pride held firm. He muttered under his breath, "Fools. I don't need them." But deep inside, a crack had formed, and it would only grow wider. Michael gently opened the back door of his old Toyota Corolla and held Mama Grace's arm as she eased herself in. The luxury compound they were leaving behind loomed in the rearview mirror like a fortress of pride, cold and echoing with the memory of disrespect. She didn't speak. Not yet. Her lips trembled, not just from age, but from disbelief. Her own son, the boy she once rocked to sleep, the boy she fed with hands blistered from farm work, had just spat in her face. Michael walked around and got into the driver's seat. He glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his voice soft. "Ma, are you comfortable?" She nodded faintly, gripping the handle with her wrinkled hands. The drive was quiet at first. The car rattled a bit, the engine humming like a tired old man, but it moved steadily through the busy Lego streets. Outside, life continued. Hawkers weaving between cars, kiki drivers shouting, buses honking. But inside that car, it was a bubble of silence and unspoken ache. After a while, Michael spoke again, gently. "Ma, I don't know what came over Daniel, but you didn't deserve that." She looked up, her voice barely audible. "He used to cry if I left his side for too long. Now he tells me to go back to dust." Michael blinked away the sting in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ma." "No. Son, you didn't hurt me." He did. They pulled up to a narrow building. A faded, two-story apartment with peeling paint and potted plants struggling for sunlight in old paint buckets. Michael parked in front of the rusted gate and rushed around to open her door. He led her up the stairs slowly, one step at a time, his hand firm under hers. She paused halfway, breathing heavily. "We're almost there," he encouraged. Finally, they entered a small one-bedroom flat. The living room was humble, a modest couch, a plastic center table, and a small shelf lined with neatly stacked books and a framed picture of a young woman and child, Michael's late wife and daughter. "Sit here, Ma," he said, placing a soft wrapper on the couch for her to rest. He brought out a glass of water and knelt before her, unlacing her worn sandals. "You don't have to," she protested weakly. "I do," he said firmly. "Because someone should remind you that you're still worthy of honor." He took a towel, dipped it in warm water, and gently wiped her dusty feet. Mama Grace watched, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. It wasn't just the kindness, it was the contrast. One man had thrown dust on her dignity. Another, with far less in his pocket, had honored her as royalty. She looked around at the simple home, the clean floor, the ticking wall clock. It wasn't wealth, but it was peace. As Michael disappeared into the kitchen to prepare something for her, Mama Grace reached into her small handbag and touched the edge of the envelope. The inheritance Daniel had rejected. Her heart began to shift, not out of anger, but out of truth. Sometimes, a crown doesn't rest on the head with gold. It rests on the heart that knows how to care. The aroma of boiling rice mixed with the scent of sizzling oil drifted from the tiny kitchen. Michael moved quickly but carefully, chopping vegetables on a small cutting board placed over the sink. He had only one burner, and the pot he used was scratched and dented, but he stirred it like it was a chef's prize pan. Mama Grace sat quietly on the couch, her feet resting on a pillow Michael had placed under them. She watched the steam curling into the air, her eyes misty but her heart a little less heavy. "You didn't have to cook," she said gently, raising her voice just enough to reach the kitchen. "I know," Michael replied, peeking out with a smile. "But you look like someone who hasn't had a proper meal all day." She chuckled softly, the first sound of warmth since the incident. "That's true. All I had this morning was Gary and groundnut. I told myself I'd eat well after I saw my son." Michael's hands paused, just briefly. He lowered the flame, wiped his palms, and walked back into the living room with a bowl of warm water and a towel. "Let me finish what I started," he said, kneeling once more in front of her. He dipped the towel, wrung it gently, and began to clean the dirt from her tired feet. "I should be the one doing this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to," Michael replied, not looking up. "I saw enough today to know the kind of woman you are." She looked away, biting her trembling lip. "I raised that boy alone," she began, the words soft but steady. "His father died when Daniel was barely 4. I sold Acra and firewood to pay for his school fees. I carried him on my back through hospital lines, fed him from my mouth when he was sick." Michael listened, saying nothing, wiping slowly, his face unreadable. "There were nights," she continued, "I didn't eat so he could. Days I begged, not for myself, but for him to get a chance." Her eyes lifted to meet Michael's. "And today, that same boy spat on me like I was trash." Michael clenched the towel in his hands. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said again, quieter this time. "He was always proud," she said, leaning back. "But I thought, maybe success would humble him. Maybe I could finally give him this." She pulled the envelope from her handbag and placed it on her lap. "The land his father left, and the savings I've kept all these years. I thought, now that he's grown, he's ready to handle it. I thought I'd surprise him. Bless him." Instead, her voice broke, and she let the silence finish the sentence. Michael stood and walked back to the kitchen, plating the food with care. A simple meal, jollof rice, a piece of fried fish, and a glass of water. He brought it to her with both hands, setting it down like he was offering royalty a feast. "It's not much," he said, "but it's made with respect." Mama Grace looked at him, her eyes brimming again, but this time, with something softer. "Gratitude. You have done more for me in 1 hour than my own blood has in years," she whispered. Michael pulled up a stool beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "Sometimes," he said gently, "God lets us see a stranger's heart, to remind us what a real son should be." She nodded, holding the warm bowl, and for the first time that day, she ate. The night was deep and quiet, the hum of the old ceiling fan the only sound in Michael's modest apartment. Mama Grace sat on the edge of the small guest mattress, her wrapper loosely tied, her bare feet touching the cool floor tiles. The dinner Michael served earlier sat well in her stomach, but her heart still ached from the weight of rejection. She clutched the brown envelope she had brought with her, the same one she had held onto like it was her life's mission. For months, she'd been waiting for the right moment to hand it over to Daniel. For years, she'd preserved its contents like sacred treasure. Now, her hands trembled not from age, but from a soul wrestling with heartbreak. Michael, ever respectful, had left her to rest and gone to his tiny corner of the room, offering her the bed while he took the floor. But sleep didn't come to Mama Grace. Not yet. Slowly, she untied the flap of the envelope and pulled out its contents. There were 3 documents. The first was a land deed, 10 acres of ancestral farmland in Ogun State. It had belonged to Daniel's late father and was now worth millions due to recent development around the area. The second was a savings bond certificate, maturing at over 25 million Nigerian nairas. She had opened it 20 years ago in Daniel's name, using the little profits she made from hawking and petty trading. She never touched it, not even when times were hard, because she believed in her son's future. The third was a handwritten letter. She unfolded it gently. Her own handwriting stared back at her, dated 3 years ago. To my son Daniel, you are the fruit of my sacrifice and the joy of my old age. If you're reading this, it means I believe you are finally ready to carry the legacy your father and I began. She stopped reading. Tears blurred the rest. Her fingers gripped the edges, then loosened. There was no joy, no pride, just pain. She folded everything back into the envelope and sat in silence for a while, staring at the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Then, slowly, she turned to Michael, who stirred slightly from his mat. "Michael," she whispered. He sat up immediately. "Yes, Mama." She patted the space beside her. He moved over, concern in his eyes. She handed him the envelope. "I kept this for my son," she said softly. "But I see now, legacy is not for the one who shares your blood. It's for the one who shares your values." Michael looked down at the envelope, unsure. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," she said, her voice steady now. "You sheltered me, fed me, respected me, with nothing to gain. That's what a real son does." "But Mama," she gently touched his hand. "It no longer belongs to my son." He stared at her, stunned. "From this day forward," she continued, "what was meant for Daniel belongs to the man who earned it with kindness." A quiet silence followed. Powerful. Eternal. Michael's lips parted, but he said nothing. Respect wouldn't let him argue. And in that small room, with nothing but love and truth between them, a mother gave away everything, not out of anger, but out of wisdom. And for the first time in her life, Mama Grace felt peace. The next morning broke with golden light streaming into Michael's small living room. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the cracked window, and the aroma of boiling pap and fried eggs filled the air. Michael moved quietly, preparing breakfast, trying not to disturb Mama Grace. She had barely spoken after handing him the envelope last night, and he hadn't dared open it, not out of fear, but out of respect. Mama Grace, however, was already awake. She sat near the corner of the room, fully dressed in a clean, patterned wrapper and blouse, her head tied neatly. Her back was straight, her face calm, but there was purpose in her eyes. This was not the posture of a frail old woman. This was the poise of someone ready to finish a mission. "Michael," she called gently. He turned quickly. "Yes, Mama." "Do you still have that your phone? The one with camera and internet?" He smiled lightly. "Yes, Ma. Bring it. I need to make a call. To my lawyer." Michael's brow furrowed. "Your lawyer?" She nodded, reaching slowly for the envelope she had placed on the stool. "There's something we need to do today, properly, legally, and permanently." Within the hour, a black Toyota Corolla pulled up outside the compound. A middle-aged man in a crisp gray suit stepped out, holding a briefcase. His name was Barrister Alyamide Ajayi, and he had known Mama Grace since the days of her late husband. They greeted warmly. Then, once seated at Michael's small dining table, she pushed the envelope toward him. "It's time to transfer everything," she said. Barrister Ajayi raised a brow. "Everything? To your son, I presume?" Mama Grace's voice didn't waver. "No, to him." She pointed gently to Michael. Michael, who had been standing in the corner, froze. "Mama, hush. Let me do what's right." The lawyer blinked. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure. My son had a chance, many." He spat on them. "This boy." She looked at Michael, eyes softening. "This boy treated me with more dignity in 2 days than Daniel ever did in 30 years. Michael tried again. "But Mama, I'm just." "You're not just anything," she interrupted. "You're a man with a good heart, and I will not let that go unnoticed." With that, Barrister Ajayi opened his briefcase and began the paperwork. Titles, deed transfers, legal clauses, all redrafted and reassigned. Michael sat in silence. barely able to believe what was happening. Mama Grace remained calm throughout, only occasionally sipping water and nodding as the lawyer explained each step. By the time the lawyer stood to leave, he looked at Michael with something close to admiration. "Congratulations," he said. "You're now the legal heir of land worth millions and a mother's trust." Mama Grace rose slowly, her knees stiff but her spirit light. "Let's go and eat," she said with a smile. "I'm starving." And just like that, the weight of years was lifted, not by gold, but by honor. What Daniel lost in arrogance, Michael gained through character. And the story wasn't done yet. It started with a headline buried on page 6 of the national business paper. Mega real estate project to launch on previously undeveloped land near Sunrise Estate. The news barely registered with most people. But for Daniel, sitting in a cafe near Lekki Phase 1, sipping overpriced coffee and scrolling through financial updates on his tablet, one phrase jumped out at him like a slap. Located on a stretch of land registered under the Grace Akinyemi Family Trust. His coffee cup froze midair. Grace Akinyemi? His mother. The paper trembled in his hand as he read further. A multi-billion naira development was breaking ground. Shopping malls, luxury apartments, tech hubs, and the valuation of the land alone had skyrocketed to nearly 850 million Nigerian nairas overnight. And it was the same land he had once mocked as worthless bush. Daniel's throat went dry. He remembered it now, vaguely. The dusty document in Mama's hands. The way she had tried to speak before he spat. The envelope she tried to give him. "No, no, no, no," he muttered, grabbing his phone and calling his assistant. "Give me my lawyer, in the car, right now." By that evening, Daniel was pacing in his apartment, storming around like a man possessed. How can she give it away? She can't do that. I'm her only son. His lawyer, a young man named Kunnel, tried to calm him. "Sir, we need to find out exactly how the transfer was done. If she's of sound mind and it was documented properly, there's not much we can do." Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "I was her son when she had nothing. Now that she has something, she gives it to a driver?" Kunnel sighed. "Apparently, the title is now under a Michael Alayemi, and I've confirmed with the land registry. The documents are clean, watertight. No, I'll sue. I'll claim elder abuse. Emotional manipulation. Fraud. Sir," Kunnel's voice dropped to a cautious tone. "Before you do all that, I'd advise something else. Maybe apologize. Quietly. You embarrassed her publicly. If this hits the news, it will ruin your image." But Daniel wasn't listening. His mind was burning with disbelief and entitlement. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out. Hours later, he found himself outside the High Court complex, where a small legal proceeding was scheduled to formalize the transfer into a trust under Michael's name. Daniel barged into the waiting area and froze. There she was, Mama Grace, sitting quietly, dressed in a clean lace wrapper, her head held high. And beside her, Michael, wearing a plain shirt and trousers, his posture respectful, but firm. Their eyes met. Mama Grace didn't flinch. Daniel rushed forward. "Mama, please, you can't do this. You know that land is my birthright." She simply turned her gaze to the lawyer beside her and said, "We're ready." And as the doors to the courtroom opened, Daniel stood there, powerless, breathless, drowning in the stench of his own pride. What he once discarded as crumbs had become a feast in another man's hands. And the door to his inheritance was no longer open. The courtroom was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. Sunlight poured through the high windows, casting streaks of gold across the wooden benches. In the front row sat Michael, hands clasped, looking both respectful and overwhelmed. Beside him, Mama Grace sat calmly, poised, elegant, unshaken. Her once-worn slippers had been replaced with modest new sandals. Her dignity? Untouched. Daniel stood at the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He had barged into the courtroom without invitation, thinking perhaps he could interrupt the proceedings, plead his case, or guilt her into changing her mind. But one look at her, proud, peaceful, and his voice caught in his throat. The family lawyer, an elderly man with a firm voice and glasses that kept sliding down his nose, stepped forward. "Today, we finalized the trust agreement and property transfer deed for Madam Grace Akinyemi," he said. "The following documents, reviewed and notarized, will pass ownership of the 3 properties and accompanying land to Mr. Michael Alayemi, under full legal title and irrevocable trust." Daniel's hands balled into fists. "I object," he suddenly barked. The judge turned, eyebrows raised. "And who are you?" He stepped forward. "I'm her only son." Mama Grace did not turn to look at him. She kept her eyes on the lawyer. The judge responded coolly. "If you're not listed on the documents or trust, you have no legal standing here today. You may observe, but any objections must be filed formally." The lawyer continued, unshaken. "Mama Grace has also submitted a letter explaining her decision, that Mr. Alayemi, in her words, showed a heart worthy of honor when her own blood did not." Michael looked down, his throat tightening. The documents were passed one by one: deed of gift, irrevocable trust papers, property transfer certificate. Mama Grace signed first. Then Michael, his hands slightly shaking. The judge stamped the final approval. And just like that, it was done. Daniel watched in silence as Mama Grace stood up, took Michael's arm, and began to walk out of the courtroom, not once looking in her son's direction. Michael glanced briefly at Daniel. There was no pride in his face, only quiet sorrow for a man who had traded love for arrogance. Daniel turned away, suddenly unsure of who he was without all the noise of his ego. For a moment, he reached into his pocket, as if searching for something. But all he found was the emptiness he had earned. The once glorious Benz now sat beneath a tattered for sale sign, its paint dulled by dust and neglect. Parked in front of a crumbling rental apartment complex far from the high-rise dreams Daniel once flaunted, the car had become a monument, not to success, but to a man's downfall. Daniel stood beside it, shoulders hunched, face sunken with regret. His once polished shoes were worn at the heel. His wristwatch no longer ticked. The phone that once rang non-stop had gone silent. The world had moved on and left him behind. He stared blankly at the car, remembering how he used to lean on it with pride, pointing at the logo while boasting to strangers. It was more than a car back then. It was proof that he'd made it. But what was it now? Just metal. Cold, motionless metal that couldn't drive away shame. A boy passed by, tugging at his mother's dress. "Mummy, that man looks sad." She looked once, then pulled the child along. Some men forget who they are until life reminds them. Daniel heard it. He didn't flinch. His thoughts drifted to Mama Grace. The look on her face when he spat, the way she didn't yell, didn't curse, just stood there, broken. And Michael, the driver who didn't have much, but had enough heart to step in where he, her own son, had failed. He closed his eyes tightly. The image of the courtroom burned into his mind. Michael, holding the documents. His mother's hand resting on Michael's shoulder. The quiet dignity in her final silence. A breeze blew, lifting the dust around his feet. He looked down at the for sale sign, then back at the car. No one had even inquired. People said it was cursed. Maybe it was. Or maybe it just carried the weight of a son's disgrace. For the first time in a long time, Daniel whispered, "Mama, I'm sorry," but the wind carried the words away, unanswered. Once upon a time, in a city paved with glass towers and golden dreams, a young man believed money was the crown that made him king. He wore arrogance like a tailored suit, and traded humility for applause. But what he failed to see was this. The throne he sat on was built by hands that bled for him. Those hands belonged to his mother, Mama Grace, a woman who gave up everything so he could rise. But when the time came for gratitude, he spat in her face. He thought he was too rich for roots, too powerful for the past, too important to bow to love. Yet what he didn't know was that blessings don't beg to be accepted, and the heart that honors its source will always overflow. Michael, a man with barely enough to feed himself, honored what Daniel rejected. He listened. He served. He respected. And in doing so, he became heir, not by blood, but by character. Daniel lost everything, not because he lacked money, but because he lacked honor. And so, the palace became a prison. The car became a coffin of dreams. And the name once spoken with pride became one whispered with pity. But Mama Grace? She found peace in the smile of a man who understood what it meant to give without entitlement, and to receive with humility. This tale is not just about inheritance or riches. It's about what truly matters when the lights go off, when the praise dies down, and when a man is left alone with his choices. Because in the end, the world doesn't remember what you drove, it remembers who you honored. The earth has a memory, and every root dishonored finds a way to tell its story, through cracks, through loss, through regret. So remember this, when you spit on your foundation, don't be surprised when your fortune crumbles. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe if you believe true riches lie in honor, not ego.